A quiet afternoon. On an unassuming Tuesday afternoon, the sun filtered softly through the leaves of the oak trees lining Willow Park. The park was a beloved sanctuary for many in the neighborhood. Children played on the swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and older folks gathered on benches to bask in the gentle warmth of the sun. Among them sat Evelyn Carter, an elderly black woman, her hands resting peacefully on her lap. At 72, Evelyn had seen her share of life's ups and downs, but today she was determined to enjoy the serenity the park offered. Dressed in a light floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat, she observed the world around her with a soft smile. Each laugh from the nearby playground filled her heart with joy, reminding her of her grandchildren who lived far away. On such days, Evelyn often felt a sense of peace wash over her, a fleeting moment of contentment in a world that was often too busy to notice the little joys. But the tranquility was abruptly interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching her. Evelyn looked up to see Officer Mark Collins, a tall, imposing figure in a crisp uniform, striding towards her. His expression was stern, eyes narrowed, and an aura of authority surrounded him. The atmosphere shifted as bystanders noticed the officer's approach, their gazes flickering with unease. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. Evelyn felt a flicker of confusion. "I'm just enjoying the day, officer," she replied, her voice steady, but a hint of nervousness crept in. His eyes narrowed further. "You don't just sit around here," he asserted, as if the very act of her presence was an affront to the law. Panic coursed through Evelyn's veins. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she could sense the hostility radiating from him. "Officer, I assure you, I'm not causing any trouble." He leaned closer, the shadow of his body casting a gloom over her. "I said you need to leave," he barked, raising his voice as passers-by began to take notice. The tension in the air thickened, and Evelyn's heart raced as the crowd's eyes shifted from her to the officer, a mix of curiosity and concern evident in their expressions. Before she could respond, Officer Collins grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet with a force that startled her. Evelyn gasped, trying to maintain her balance, but the sheer surprise of the encounter sent her stumbling back. Her body collided with the ground, the cold concrete scraping her skin as shock and pain coursed through her. Gasps erupted from the crowd, a mixture of disbelief and horror at the sight of the officer manhandling the elderly woman. Yet fear kept them frozen in place, their phones instinctively pulling out to record the incident unfolding before them. In the midst of the chaos, Evelyn heard a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Mom." It was Marcus, her only son, rushing toward her with a fire in his eyes. He was a well-built man in his late 40s, a community leader respected for his calm demeanor and wisdom. As he approached, Officer Collins hesitated, glancing at Marcus with a flicker of uncertainty. "Step away from my mother," Marcus commanded, his voice resonating with authority and anger. The officer, momentarily taken aback, quickly masked his surprise with disdain. "So this is your son," he sneered, a mocking laugh escaping his lips. "Like mother, like son, huh?" Marcus's fists clenched tightly at his sides, his jaw set in determination. "I'm only going to say this once. Step away from my mother." The officer's face contorted, his ego inflating as he tried to reassert control. He took a step forward, his hand instinctively reaching for his baton. The crowd collectively held their breath, sensing the tension escalating dangerously. Evelyn, struggling to sit up, looked at Marcus, her heart pounding in fear and helplessness. "Marcus, please," she managed to whisper, the pain evident in her voice. But Marcus was resolute. "You have no right to treat her this way. She's done nothing wrong." His gaze was unwavering, locking eyes with the officer, each man standing firm in his beliefs. Officer Collins sneered, his arrogance showing through. "You think you can just come in here and give orders? You and your mother don't belong here." The anger flared within Marcus, but he took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. "She's not a criminal. She deserves respect," he shot back, his voice steady and powerful. But the officer was not deterred. "I don't need a reason to arrest you both. She's disrupting the peace." At that moment, the situation took a turn for the worse. The officer lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's arm and twisting it behind his back. Evelyn's heart sank as she watched her son go down, the officer's grip cruel and unyielding. "Stop this!" Evelyn cried out, her voice breaking as she pushed herself up. But another officer, one who had just arrived, shoved her back down again, coldly pulling out handcuffs and fastening them around her wrists. The realization hit her hard. She was being arrested for merely existing in a public space. As they were both led away, Marcus caught Evelyn's gaze, a silent promise exchanged between them. He would not let this injustice go unchallenged. The holding cell. Inside the police cruiser, the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. The ride was bumpy, and Evelyn could feel every jolt of the car reverberating through her aching body. She leaned against the cool metal seat, her mind racing with confusion and disbelief. How had this escalated so quickly? How had a quiet day in the park turned into a nightmare? Marcus sat beside her, his jaw clenched and eyes blazing with fury. He had always been a protector in their family, always looking out for her, but now he felt powerless. As they were transported to the precinct, the weight of the situation began to sink in. They were not just being arrested. They were being stripped of their dignity and humanity. "What will happen to us?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus turned to her, his expression a mixture of determination and concern. "I won't let them get away with this, Mom. We'll figure it out. Just stay strong." The cruiser finally pulled into the precinct, the surrounding area bustling with officers going about their duties. But to Marcus and Evelyn, it felt like they were entering a world of oppression and hostility. They were escorted inside by the officers who had apprehended them, their hands still cuffed. As they moved through the station, whispers erupted around them. Officers glanced over with curious eyes, some sneering, others appearing uncertain. Marcus could feel the judgment, the sneers. It was palpable. They were led to a holding area, a stark room with cold gray walls and harsh fluorescent lights. The door slammed shut behind them, and they were left alone, their surroundings echoing with silence. "How did it come to this?" Evelyn murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, this isn't about you. This is about power and control," Marcus replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "They're treating us like criminals because of who we are." Evelyn sighed deeply, the weight of the world pressing down on her. "I just wanted to enjoy a peaceful day. I didn't think this could happen." Marcus reached over, taking her hand in his. "I know, and I'm so sorry this happened to you. I promise I'll do everything I can to make it right." But as the minutes turned into hours, the initial rush of adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a dull ache of frustration and helplessness. They sat in silence, the occasional sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway a reminder of the world outside their small prison. Finally, the door creaked open, and an officer stepped inside. His demeanor was different. He was younger, perhaps just out of the academy, and he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Captain Johnson needs to speak with you," he said, his eyes darting nervously between the two of them. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Are we being released?" The officer hesitated, his voice wavering. "He just wants a statement." Evelyn's heart sank. Why do they need a statement if we haven't done anything wrong? "Look, I can't say much," the officer replied, his voice low. "Just follow me." As they were led out of the holding area, Marcus felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. He knew that this was only the beginning. They walked through the sterile hallways of the precinct, the sounds of the station a stark reminder of the chaos they had just experienced. Once inside the interrogation room, they were seated across from Captain Johnson. He was an imposing figure, his age and experience palpable as he scrutinized them. "Captain Johnson, we want to know why we were treated like this," Marcus said, his voice firm. Captain Johnson shifted in his seat, his expression guarded. "I'm aware of the situation. The officers acted on a misunderstanding." Evelyn felt her frustration bubble to the surface. "Misunderstanding. They assaulted me. They arrested us for no reason. I understand your anger, but you have to understand that officers sometimes make decisions based on their training and experiences," Captain Johnson replied, his tone calm yet defensive. "And what about our experiences?" Marcus countered, his voice rising slightly. "My mother has lived her entire life in this community. She has every right to be in that park. You can't excuse their behavior with training." The captain leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We'll review the conduct of the officers involved. But these situations are often complicated. You have to understand the pressures we face on the streets." "And what about the pressure on us as citizens?" Marcus challenged, his heart racing with anger. "You think it's easy to live in fear of those who are supposed to protect us." Silence filled the room as Captain Johnson regarded them, his expression revealing a flicker of understanding. He seemed to weigh his words carefully before responding. "I can assure you that I'll look into this matter seriously. But you need to realize that not all officers share the same perspective." "We deserve to be treated with respect," Evelyn interjected, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't ask for this. All I wanted was a peaceful day in the park." "That's all anyone should want," Captain Johnson acknowledged, his tone softening slightly. "I'll ensure a thorough investigation." As they left the interrogation room, Evelyn glanced at Marcus, who was deep in thought. "I won't let this go unchallenged," he said resolutely. "They need to know that they can't just treat people like this." Gathering evidence. The following days felt like a blur of frustration and uncertainty. Evelyn and Marcus faced the aftermath of the incident, the memory of the officer's aggression still fresh in their minds. Evelyn struggled to find her footing again, the tranquility of the park forever tarnished by the violent encounter. Marcus, however, was determined to pursue justice. He spent hours gathering evidence, reaching out to witnesses from the park, and collecting video footage from those who had recorded the incident. The community began to rally around them. And slowly, more voices joined their cause, each sharing their own stories of discrimination and injustice. "People are starting to come forward," Marcus said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and urgency. "I spoke with a woman who witnessed the whole thing. She's willing to testify." Evelyn nodded, her heart swelling with pride for her son. "I never imagined so many people would stand with us." The support felt empowering, but the fear of retaliation still lingered in the back of Marcus's mind. He had seen how swiftly things could escalate within the precinct, especially when officers felt threatened. Still, he pressed on, driven by the need to protect his mother and others who had faced similar injustices. One evening, after a long day of gathering statements, Marcus sat with Evelyn on the porch of their home. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the neighborhood. "Mom, I want you to know how much you inspire me," he said, turning to face her. "Your strength and resilience have shaped who I am today." Evelyn smiled softly, her heart swelling with love for her son. "You've always been my protector, Marcus. But this fight is yours now." As they talked, they devised a plan to address the local community council. They would present their evidence, sharing not only their story, but also the voices of those who had faced similar discrimination. They believed that together, they could create a ripple effect, fostering awareness and demanding change. The next week, as they prepared for the council meeting, the air buzzed with anticipation. The community center was packed, voices mingling in an excited hum. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but as he looked at the faces in the crowd, he found strength in their shared purpose. When it was their turn to speak, Marcus stepped to the front, his heart racing. He cleared his throat, scanning the room filled with neighbors, friends, and even some local media. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves. My mother and I have experienced a terrible injustice, and we are here to share our story, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has faced discrimination and abuse." As he spoke, he felt the tension in the room shift, the audience leaning in closer, their expressions filled with empathy. Marcus recounted the events of that fateful day in the park, the shameful treatment his mother endured, and the subsequent gathering of evidence. "This isn't just our story, it's a reflection of a larger issue within our community," he continued. "Too many people are treated unfairly, often because of the color of their skin. We cannot remain silent while these injustices persist." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "I'm just an ordinary woman who wanted to enjoy a day in the park, but because of the color of my skin, I was treated like a criminal. We must work together to ensure that this doesn't happen again. No one should have to fear for their safety simply because of who they are." The room erupted in applause, voices rising in support. People began sharing their own experiences, recounting stories of discrimination, profiling, and the pain of living under constant scrutiny. The solidarity in the room was palpable, an energy that ignited a fire within Marcus. As the meeting continued, the council members listened intently, jotting down notes and nodding in agreement. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. For the first time, they felt heard, their pain acknowledged, and their demands for change legitimized. At the end of the night, a council member stood up, addressing the room. "We hear you. This is not just about one incident. This is about our community as a whole. We will take this matter seriously and ensure that an investigation is launched." The applause that followed was deafening, a chorus of hope reverberating through the community center. As Marcus and Evelyn left the meeting, a sense of purpose coursed through them. They were no longer just victims, they were advocates for change, rallying their community toward a common goal. The investigation. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as the investigation into the incident began. Evelyn and Marcus continued to gather support from their community, attending rallies and speaking engagements. Their story was gaining traction, inspiring others to come forward and share their experiences of injustice. One afternoon, as they prepared for another community meeting, Marcus received a call from Captain Johnson. "Marcus, I'd like to meet with you to discuss the ongoing investigation," he said, his tone professional yet cautious. Marcus hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "All right. I want to know what steps are being taken." They met at a local coffee shop, the atmosphere bustling with activity. Captain Johnson arrived, his expression serious, as they took a seat in a quiet corner. "I want to be transparent with you," he began, his voice low. "The investigation into Officer Collins and his partner is underway. However, you should know that these things take time, and there may be pushback from within the department." "I understand that," Marcus replied, his frustration bubbling just below the surface. "But this isn't just a matter of time. It's about accountability. My mother deserves that." Captain Johnson nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I assure you that I'm taking this seriously. I've spoken with other officers who witnessed the event, and I'm gathering all the evidence I can." As they spoke, Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but he also knew the complexities of the situation. The system was often resistant to change, especially when it involved its own officers. "Is there anything we can do to expedite the process?" Marcus asked, leaning forward, urgency in his voice. "I can't promise anything," Captain Johnson replied, "but if you keep rallying support and raising awareness, it will certainly help. Public pressure can be a powerful tool." Marcus left the meeting feeling conflicted. While he appreciated the captain's efforts, he knew that systemic change was a long and arduous process. The fight was far from over. As the investigation continued, Evelyn found solace in the community's support. People began to approach her, sharing their stories and expressing their solidarity. It became a healing journey for her, a way to reclaim her voice after the traumatic incident. One day, while sitting with a group of women at a local community center, Evelyn listened intently as they shared their own experiences. Each story resonated deeply, a reminder of the common threads of resilience and courage woven through their lives. "I never thought I'd have to fight like this at my age," she confessed, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I refuse to let fear silence me." The women nodded in agreement, their expressions filled with determination. They shared tips on advocacy, how to navigate the system, and the importance of standing together in the face of injustice. "I may be old, but I'm still strong," Evelyn declared, a fire igniting within her. "And I'm not done fighting yet." As the investigation unfolded, the community's support grew stronger. They organized rallies, marches, and community forums, each event a step toward justice and awareness. The media took notice, covering their story extensively, highlighting the need for systemic change within the police force. Meanwhile, the investigation revealed troubling patterns within the department. Officer Collins' history of excessive force and racial profiling began to surface, and whispers of discontent echoed through the precinct. It became clear that the problem was not isolated. It was part of a much larger issue that required urgent attention. One evening, as Marcus reviewed the latest updates from the investigation, he received a call from a reporter. "Marcus, we'd like to do a feature on you and your mother, highlighting your fight for justice," she said, her voice enthusiastic. "Absolutely," he replied, feeling a rush of purpose. "We need to share our story, to shine a light on what's happening." As they prepared for the interview, Evelyn felt a mix of excitement and nerves. They would be sharing their truth on a larger platform, and she wanted to ensure their message resonated. When the day of the interview arrived, they sat side by side, facing the camera. Marcus spoke passionately about their experience, detailing the events leading up to the confrontation with Officer Collins. Evelyn followed, her voice steady as she recounted the humiliation and fear she had felt that day. "We need to hold people accountable for their actions," Marcus emphasized. "It's not just about us. It's about creating a safer environment for everyone in our community." As the interview aired, it sparked widespread discussions. Social media erupted with comments of support, outrage, and calls for justice. People began sharing their own stories, flooding the internet with hashtags demanding accountability and reform. In the days that followed, the pressure mounted on the police department. Community leaders and activists rallied together, demanding transparency and action. The investigation had taken on a life of its own, fueled by the collective voices of those who had been wronged. But with the growing momentum came backlash. There were whispers within the precinct, and Marcus could sense the tension rising. Officers who had once been allies now looked at him with suspicion. "Be careful, Marcus," one of his colleagues warned him quietly. "Not everyone is happy with the way things are going." "I know," Marcus replied, a steely resolve in his voice. "But I can't back down now. This is bigger than me." As the investigation progressed, it became clear that a significant change was necessary within the police force. The community was united, and they would not let their voices be silenced. The hearing. Months passed, and the investigation into Officer Collins reached a critical juncture. The community's demand for justice had grown louder, and now it was time for a public hearing to discuss the findings. Marcus and Evelyn knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for them, but for everyone who had suffered from similar injustices. The day of the hearing arrived, and the atmosphere in the community center was charged with energy. A large crowd gathered, filled with supporters, community leaders, and families who had faced discrimination. Banners were hung, and the air buzzed with anticipation as people took their seats. Marcus felt a mix of nerves and determination as he and Evelyn walked into the packed room. They took their places at the front, their hearts pounding in unison. The panel consisted of local officials, community leaders, and representatives from the police department. As the proceedings began, the chairperson welcomed everyone and outlined the purpose of the hearing. "Today we are here to address the issue of police conduct and accountability," she stated, her voice steady and authoritative. "We want to hear from the community and ensure that all voices are heard." Marcus glanced at Evelyn, who sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, ready to share their story once more. As the hearing progressed, community members took turns speaking, sharing their experiences with police brutality, discrimination, and the struggles they faced within the justice system. Each story resonated deeply, a painful reminder of the work that lay ahead. When it was their turn to speak, Marcus stood up, his voice filled with passion. "My mother and I were treated like criminals for simply existing in a public space," he began, his heart racing. "This isn't just about us. It's about every single person who has been subjected to abuse and profiling. We cannot remain silent while this continues to happen in our community." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of support flooding the room. Evelyn stood beside him, her voice steady as she continued, "We need to hold those in power accountable. We deserve respect and dignity, and it's time for change." As they spoke, Marcus could see the faces of those around him, people nodding in agreement, tears in their eyes, some even standing in solidarity. The room felt alive with a sense of purpose, a collective determination to fight for justice. After their testimony, the panel took a moment to deliberate. The atmosphere was thick with tension as everyone waited for their response. Finally, the chairperson stood up, addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for sharing your stories. We hear you, and we are committed to making change within our police department," she stated, her voice filled with conviction. "We will ensure that a comprehensive review is conducted, and we will work toward implementing new policies to address these issues." A wave of relief washed over the room as applause erupted once more. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental, a step in the right direction. As the hearing concluded, Marcus and Evelyn were approached by several community leaders who expressed their gratitude and support. "Your courage has inspired many," one leader said, tears in her eyes. "Together, we will continue this fight." As they left the community center, Evelyn felt a sense of hope blooming within her. "I never thought we could make such a difference," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Mom, we've only just begun," Marcus replied, a fierce determination in his eyes. "This is about more than just us. We're building a movement, and together, we'll ensure that our voices are heard." A new dawn. As the months passed, the investigation into Officer Collins culminated in significant changes within the police department. Following the public hearing, a comprehensive review was launched, leading to new policies aimed at increasing accountability and transparency. The community had rallied together, forming coalitions and advocacy groups, working tirelessly to ensure that the momentum continued. Marcus and Evelyn were at the forefront, sharing their story and empowering others to stand up against injustice. One day, Evelyn received an unexpected call from Captain Johnson. "Evelyn, I wanted to reach out personally to update you on the outcome of the investigation," he said, his voice sincere. "What did you find?" she asked, her heart racing with anticipation. "Officer Collins was found to have a history of excessive force and racial profiling. He's been suspended pending further investigation," Captain Johnson explained. "We're also implementing training programs for all officers to address implicit bias and de-escalation techniques." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she absorbed the news. "Thank you for taking this seriously." "I believe in change, Evelyn," he replied. "And it starts with accountability." As the community celebrated the news, Marcus and Evelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose. They organized a rally to honor those who had suffered from police brutality and discrimination, inviting community members to share their stories and experiences. The day of the rally was filled with energy and excitement. People gathered in the park, carrying signs, chanting, and sharing their messages of hope and resilience. As Marcus stood at the podium, he looked out at the crowd, a sense of pride swelling within him. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing through the air. "We are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for everyone who has faced injustice. Together, we will create a safer, more equitable community for all." Evelyn stood beside him, her heart full as she saw the impact of their fight. The community had come together, and their voices were finally being heard. As the sun set on that beautiful day, casting a warm glow over the park, Evelyn realized that while their journey had been filled with challenges, it had also been filled with hope. They had turned their pain into purpose, inspiring change within themselves and their community. "We did this, Mom," Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion. "We made a difference." Evelyn nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "Yes, we did. And we won't stop here. We'll keep fighting for what's right." The park, once a place of fear and confrontation, had transformed into a symbol of hope and resilience, and as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that their journey was just beginning. The fight for justice would continue, fueled by the strength of their community and the unyielding belief that change was possible. Together, they were a force for good, a beacon of light in a world that often felt dark. And as they walked away from the rally, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle within her heart. The future was bright, and their voices would carry on, echoing through the community as they continued to stand up for what was right.